The air in the mess hall at FOB Erebus was thick enough to chew. It was a greasy amalgam of diesel fumes from the generators, scorched dust from the surrounding hellmanned wasteland, and the faint, ever-present metallic tang of impending violence. It was a smell the young Marines of 1st Platoon, Bravo Company, had come to associate with home. They owned this space, a noisy, clattering island of steel tables and sweat-stained camaraderie in a sea of hostility. Into this space walked Chief Warrant Officer 4 Anya Sharma. She moved with a quiet economy that should have been invisible but, in the boisterous ecosystem of the Chow Hall, was as conspicuous as a ghost. She was not old, but she was not young. Her face was a roadmap of sun and wind, with lines around her eyes that spoke of long hours staring into unforgiving distances. Her hair, streaked with a surprising amount of gray, was pulled back in a severe, regulation bun. Her uniform, a sterile set of digital camouflage without the salty, lived in fade of the grunts, marked her as other. She was logistics or signals or some other rear-echelon specialty that dealt in spreadsheets and supply chains, not blood and brass. She collected a tray, her movements deliberate and unhurried. A scoop of rehydrated eggs, 2 strips of bacon that buckled under their own weight, and a cup of black coffee. She found an empty table in the corner, away from the main currents of traffic, and sat with her back to the wall. It was a habit, instinctual and deep, that the Marines didn't notice but a predator would have. They noticed her, though. Sergeant Cole, all jutting jaw and corded neck, watched her from his table, the self-appointed alpha of the pack. He nudged Corporal Davis, a lanky kid with eyes that were still too wide for the things they'd seen. "Check it out," Cole grunted, jerking his chin toward the corner. New XO for the REMF battalion must have landed REMF rear echelon motherfucker. It was the deepest insult a grunt could level. Davis snickered. "Looks like my high school librarian Sarge. Bet she knows the Dewey Decimal System for MREs," added PFC Miller, the youngest of the group, desperate to fit in. The table erupted in low, guttural laughter. Sharma didn't look up. She ate her eggs with a fork, each bite measured, her gaze fixed on the middle distance. She was a stone in a river of noise, and the water was beginning to press against her. Cole found her stillness irritating, an affront to the chaotic energy he cultivated. He saw weakness in her solitude, a target in her silence. He pushed his chair back, the metal legs scraping a protest against the concrete floor. "Let's go welcome the new CWO to the real world, boys." They swaggered over, a loose formation of youthful arrogance, casting long shadows under the harsh fluorescent lights. They surrounded her table, not quite touching it, but penning her in with their physical presence. Cole leaned forward, planting his meaty hands on her table, his knuckles white. The clatter of his tray made her flinch, a microscopic tightening of her shoulders. It was the only reaction she gave. "Ma'am," Cole began, his voice dripping with faux deference. "Sergeant Cole, Bravo 16, just wanted to make sure you were settling in okay. It can be a little intense out here for folks from behind the wire." Sharma slowly finished chewing a piece of bacon. She looked at him, her eyes a flat, neutral gray. They held no fear, no anger, no warmth. They were simply observant. It was unsettling. "I'm fine, Sergeant." Her voice was low, raspier than they expected. It didn't fit the librarian image. "Good to hear," Cole pressed on, a smirk playing on his lips, "because sometimes the paperwork can get a little loud. Wouldn't want you to get rattled when the real bullets start flying." Davis and Miller snickered on cue. Sharma took a slow sip of her coffee. The ceramic mug was thick and white. Her hand was steady, not a tremor. She placed it back down with a soft click. "I'll try to manage," she said, her tone unchanging. The lack of reaction was a goad. Cole wanted a response. He wanted her to be flustered, indignant, maybe even a little scared. This placid wall of calm was infuriating. He was used to people reacting to him with fear, with respect, with anger. Anything but this quiet dismissal. "You know, ma'am," he said, leaning closer. his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried across the nearby tables. This isn't like back at Lejeune or Pendleton. The bad guys here, they don't fill out requisition forms. They shoot back. Hard. You see a flash, you hit the deck. Don't stand there trying to file a report on it. The other Marines at nearby tables were watching now, enjoying the show. An officer from the S4 shop, a butterbar lieutenant, looked over, saw the CW04's rank, and then saw Cole's belligerent posture. The lieutenant quickly found something fascinating about his own tray of eggs and looked away. No one was going to step in. This was the grunt's world. Sharma picked up her fork again. She looked down at her tray, as if considering her next bite. "Thank you for the tactical advice, Sergeant. It's been noted." Her response was so dry, so devoid of emotion, that it momentarily threw Cole off his rhythm. It was like punching water. He straightened up, his face flushing slightly. His audience was waiting for the punchline, the moment of humiliation. He decided to escalate. He reached out and casually pushed her coffee cup, sloshing the hot liquid across her tray and onto the sleeve of her uniform. "Whoops. Clumsy me. See? Things happen fast out here. Gotta have that situational awareness." Sharma looked at the dark stain spreading on her cuff. She looked at the spilled coffee pooling around her bacon. Then, very slowly, she lifted her gaze back to Cole's face. For the first time, something flickered in those gray eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, heavier. It was a look of profound assessment, like a master craftsman judging a flawed piece of wood. She was weighing him, measuring him, and finding him wanting. The look lasted only a second before the placid mask returned. "Accidents happen, Sergeant," she said, her voice still perfectly level. She picked up a napkin and began to methodically dab at her sleeve. The moment was broken by a figure appearing at Cole's shoulder. It was Major Renner, the company commander, a man whose ambition had long outpaced his competence. He had a perpetual look of harried importance. "Sergeant Cole," Renner said, his tone one of mild annoyance. "Don't you have a platoon to supervise? Stop harassing the support staff." The word harassing was a mild rebuke, but the phrase support staff was the real insult. It validated Cole's entire premise. Renner glanced at Sharma, his eyes taking in her rank, her age, and the bland, non-infantry branch insignia on her collar. He gave a dismissive sniff, a silent confirmation that she was not one of the important people. She was furniture. "Just offering a friendly welcome, sir," Cole said, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He had gotten his reaction, not from her, but from the major, which was even better. He had established the social order. "Do it on your own time," Renner snapped, before turning and striding away toward the command tent, his importance trailing behind him like a cape. Cole gave Sharma a final, parting smirk. "You have a good day now, ma'am. Try to stay safe." He and his cronies sauntered back to their table, high on the cheap victory. They retold the story in loud whispers, the laughter growing with each embellishment. Sharma was left alone in her corner, the coffee stain on her sleeve a small, dark testament to her humiliation. She calmly finished her breakfast, every movement as precise and unhurried as before. She ate the last piece of bacon, drank the remaining half of her coffee, and stood up. As she carried her tray to the disposal window, she passed their table. Cole looked up, expecting to see her walk by with her eyes downcast. But she met his gaze. Her face was unreadable, a mask of utter neutrality. But her eyes, for just a fraction of a second, held that same cold, calculating light. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A promise that a debt had been incurred and would, at some point, be paid in a currency he did not yet understand. Then she was gone, leaving only the lingering smell of spilled coffee and the faint, unsettling echo of her silence. The Marine's laughter felt a little less certain in its wake. The first explosion was not a distant crump or a Hollywood boom. It was a physical blow, a violent atmospheric punch that slammed the air from every lung in the mess hall. The world dissolved into a concussive roar that vibrated through the concrete floor, up through the soles of their boots, and into the marrow of their bones. Trays and mugs leaped from tables, a crashing symphony of metal and ceramic. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the room into a disorienting twilight, lit only by the hellish orange glow of fires that had, a second ago, not existed. A second blast, closer this time, ripped through the air. The concussion wave shattered the mess hall's reinforced windows, spraying the interior with a glittering rain of deadly projectiles. Shrapnel, hot and jagged, tore through the thin metal walls like supersonic wasps. Men screamed, not the defiant war cries of training videos, but high, ragged shrieks of surprise and agony. Chaos was absolute. The young Marines of Bravo Company, so full of swagger moments before, were now just terrified boys. Their training screamed at them to find cover, to return fire, to do something. But the attack was too sudden, too overwhelming. It defied doctrine. Mortars were supposed to be harassing fire, inaccurate and sporadic. This was different. This was a surgical, brutal decapitation strike. The blasts weren't random. They were walking a deliberate path toward the FOB's nerve center, the command tent and the communications array. Sergeant Cole was on the floor, a ringing in his ears so loud it felt like a solid object lodged in his skull. Dust and cordite choked the air, a gritty paste that coated his tongue. He tried to shout, to rally his men, but only a dry croak emerged. He saw Miller on the ground, clutching his leg, a dark stain spreading rapidly across his trousers. Davis was frozen, plastered against a wall, his eyes wide and vacant with shock, his rifle still slung uselessly over his shoulder. The world outside the shattered windows was a maelstrom of fire and noise. The rhythmic thumping of heavy machine gun fire joined the chorus, answered by the frantic, sporadic pop-pop-pop of M4s from the perimeter guards. RPGs streaked across the sky, their rocket motors leaving smoky trails that ended in blossoming fireballs against HESCO barriers and vehicle hulls. This wasn't a raid. It was an invasion. Cole's mind raced, trying to process the flood of catastrophic data. Get to the bunker. Rally at the TOC. Find the platoon commander. But the TOC was likely a crater, and the path to any designated rally point was a shooting gallery. He was trapped. His authority, built on bravado and the rigid structure of the Corps, had crumbled to dust in less than 30 seconds. He was just another target, bleeding from a cut on his forehead he hadn't even felt happen, his mind a screaming vortex of panic. And then, through the haze and the cacophony, a figure moved. It was the woman, CWO4 Sharma. She was not on the floor. She was not screaming. She was not frozen. While everyone else had been thrown into disarray by the initial shockwave, she had flowed. The moment the first blast hit, she had dropped, not in a heap, but into a low, compressed crouch behind the solid steel serving line. She had used the split second of stunned silence between the first and second explosions to scan, to process, to act. Now she moved through the wreckage with a chilling purpose. Her steps were silent and sure-footed, weaving through overturned tables and fallen men. She wasn't running. She was gliding, her body low, her head on a swivel. The chaos that paralyzed everyone else seemed to be a medium she understood, a language she spoke fluently. She reached Corporal Davis first. He was still catatonic, staring at the fiery spectacle outside. She didn't shout his name. She didn't shake him. She grabbed the front of his flak jacket, hauled him down behind a solid concrete support pillar, and slapped him hard across the face. The sting of it broke the spell. Report. Her voice was not a shout. It was a low, sharp command that cut through the ringing in his ears. It was the voice of command, pure and undiluted. I don't... Davis stammered, his eyes finally focusing on her. Weapon, she snapped, pointing at the rifle on his back. Get your weapon in the fight. Window, 2 o'clock. Suppressing fire. Short, controlled bursts. Go! The sheer, unshakable certainty in her voice was an anchor in the storm. It was an order, not a suggestion. It was the kind of order a man follows on instinct because the person giving it seems to know precisely how the world works, even as it's ending. Davis, his training reasserting itself, fumbled for his rifle, chambered around, and began laying down fire toward the flickering muzzle flashes he could now see in the distance. Sharma was already moving again. She slid over to PFC Miller, who was now moaning, his face pale with shock and blood loss. She ripped a strip of cloth from a tablecloth, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a trauma surgeon. She ignored his cries as she located the wound, a deep gash from a piece of flying metal in his thigh. "It's through and through. No artery," she said, more to herself than to him. She bypassed the standard-issue tourniquet on his kit, knowing it was too slow for this. Instead, she packed the wound channel with gauze from his own IFAK, her fingers working deep inside the torn muscle with a brutal, life-saving intimacy. She wrapped it tight with the cloth, cinching a knot that would have made a master sailor proud. "Stay down. Don't move." Cole watched this dumbfounded. His mind was still struggling to catch up. Who was this woman? This logistician? She moved like no one he had ever seen. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. Every action had a purpose. Assess, prioritize, act. It was the ODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act, executed at a speed he had only ever read about in after-action reports from Tier 1 units. The mess hall was now taking direct fire. Bullets zipped through the broken windows, cracking against the concrete pillars and thudding into the bodies of the dead and dying. The enemy was closing in, exploiting the breach created by the initial bombardment. They were no longer just targets. They were about to be overrun. Sharma seemed to feel the shift in the battle's rhythm. She rose from Miller's side and scanned the room, her eyes cataloging every detail. The number of effectives, the angles of fire, the points of cover and concealment. She saw a dead Marine near the kitchen entrance, his M4 lying a few feet from his outstretched hand. She moved toward him, a low, leopard-like crawl that kept her below the incoming fire. Cole saw a green tracer round sizzle past where her head had been a second before. She didn't even flinch. She reached the fallen Marine, gently moved his hand, and took the rifle. It felt natural in her hands, an extension of her body. She checked the magazine, slapped the bolt carrier, and chambered a round in one fluid, practiced motion. She propped the rifle on an overturned steel table, sighting down the ACOG scope. The world outside was a confusing blur of smoke, fire, and shadows. But through the scope in her eyes it resolved into a set of distinct tactical problems. She saw a team of 3 insurgents using a burning Humvee for cover, preparing to assault their position. She didn't spray and pray. She breathed out, her body becoming perfectly still. The rifle cracked once. One of the figures dropped. She acquired the next target. The rifle cracked again. The second figure crumpled. The third, realizing what was happening, broke cover and ran. Sharma led him by a foot. The rifle cracked a third time. The man fell forward and did not get up. 3 rounds. 3 kills. In under 5 seconds. Cole had never seen shooting like that. Not on the range, not in combat. It was inhumanly precise. It wasn't the marksmanship of a Marine grunt. It was the cold, calculated lethality of a predator. She turned her head slightly, her eyes still scanning the kill zone outside. "Sergeant Cole." Her voice shocked him back to reality. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his own rifle. "Ma'am." The word felt inadequate, ridiculous. "Status," she commanded. "How many of your men can still fight?" "4. Maybe 5 of us in here. Davis is on the window. Miller's hit. Get them organized," she ordered, her voice a whip crack of authority. "Overturn those tables along that wall. Create a fortified position. Consolidate your fields of fire. I want interlocking lanes covering all windows and the main door. Redistribute ammo from the casualties. Move, Sergeant. Now!" For the first time since enlisting, Sergeant Cole followed an order without question, without analysis, without ego. He simply did it. He scrambled to the other stunned survivors, his voice finally returning. "You heard her. Move. Get those tables. Let's go, go, go." The remaining Marines, desperate for direction, responded instantly. They hauled the heavy steel tables, creating a makeshift barricade. The terrified, disorganized individuals were beginning to coalesce into a fighting unit again, and the catalyst was the quiet woman in the corner, who was now methodically eliminating targets with an efficiency that was both terrifying and beautiful. She was no librarian. She was no pencil pusher. Cole didn't know what she was, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was the only reason any of them were still alive. The next hour was a blur of controlled violence, orchestrated by the calm, steady voice of CWO-4 Sharma. The mess hall had become a fortress, a tiny island of defiance in the overrun FOB. Under her direction, the handful of survivors had transformed the chaotic wreckage into a well-defended position. Tables formed the outer wall, trays filled with dirt from shattered sandbags provided extra cover, and fields of fire were cleared and assigned. Sharma moved like a conductor, pointing out targets, calling for shifts in fire, and anticipating the enemy's moves before they happened. Davis, window 3, suppressed the corner of that Connix box. They're massing there. Cole, watched the kitchen door. They'll try to flank us through the back. Her commands were clipped, precise, and always correct. She fought with a terrifying economy. While the Marines burned through magazines in long bursts of suppressive fire, driven by adrenaline and fear, she fired single, well-aimed shots. Each crack of her rifle was a punctuation mark in the battle, and each one seemed to find a home. She would watch, wait, breathe, and squeeze. A muzzle flash from a dark window 200 meters away would be answered by a single shot, and the muzzle flash would disappear. An RPG gunner setting up on a rooftop was suddenly flung backward, his weapon clattering to the ground. Cole found himself watching her, mesmerized, during a brief lull when the enemy was regrouping. She was crouched behind their barricade, her borrowed M4 resting on the edge of an overturned table. She wasn't breathing heavily. Her face wasn't slick with the panicked sweat that covered his own. She was focused, her eyes constantly scanning, processing the battlefield like a complex equation. She ejected a spent magazine and reached for a fresh one from the pile they had scavenged from the fallen. As she slammed the new magazine home, the sleeve of her uniform, stained and torn from the earlier coffee spill and the subsequent chaos, rode up her forearm. And Cole saw it. It was faded, the lines blurred by years of sun and salt, partially obscured by a smudge of grease and blood. But it was unmistakable. Inked into her skin was a small, simple design. An eagle clutching a trident, a pistol, and an anchor. The special warfare insignia. The seal trident. The sight hit Cole with the force of a physical blow. His mind reeled, struggling to reconcile the image with the woman he had mocked just an hour ago. A SEAL. Not just a SEAL, but a CWO-4. A chief warrant officer in the naval special warfare community was a rare breed. They weren't administrators. They were the keepers of the flame, the technical and tactical masters, often the most experienced and lethal operators in a platoon or task force. A CWO-4 would have decades of experience. 20 years, at least. 20 years of doing the kind of work that made this firefight in a mess hall look like a schoolyard scuffle. The pieces clicked into place with dizzying speed. Her impossible calm, her flawless marksmanship, her instant command of tactics, the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way her eyes saw everything. The quiet corner table back to the wall. It wasn't weakness. It was a lifetime of threat assessment. Her silence wasn't meekness. It was the discipline of a warrior who knew that words were liabilities. He remembered old sea stories, legends passed down from senior enlisted about operators who became ghosts, their names spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the bars of Coronado and Virginia Beach. He remembered one name in particular, a call sign from the early days in Afghanistan and the darkest corners of Iraq, a name associated with impossible missions and a near-supernatural survival rate. Nyx, the Greek goddess of the night, a shadow who moved unseen and struck without warning. They said Nyx had retired, faded away into the warrant officer ranks, becoming a planner, a strategist, a legend put out to pasture. Cole looked at the woman beside him, calmly scanning her sector. The librarian, the REMF. He felt a wave of shame so profound it was nauseating. He and his men hadn't just been disrespectful. They had been fools. They had been children taunting a tiger, utterly oblivious to the power coiled behind the quiet eyes. He crawled over to Corporal Davis, who was reloading, his hands shaking. "Davis?" Cole whispered, his voice hoarse. "Look at her arm. Her forearm." Davis glanced over, squinted, and his eyes went wide. "Is that, holy shit, Sarge? Is that what I think it is?" "Yeah," Cole breathed. "It is." The information spread between the survivors in hushed, awestruck whispers during the next lull. The way they looked at her changed completely. The fear of the enemy outside was still real, but it was now overshadowed by a new, powerful emotion. Absolute reverence for the warrior who was leading them. They were no longer just following the orders of a competent stranger. They were fighting alongside a living legend. The enemy, emboldened by the lack of organized resistance from the rest of the FOB, launched another major assault on their position. A heavy machine gun opened up from a fortified position, chewing through their makeshift barricade, sending splinters of steel and concrete flying. "We need to take out that gun," Davis yelled over the deafening roar. "We can't maneuver. We can't even peek over the top." Before Cole could even process the problem, Sharma was already solving it. "Cole, Davis, Miller too," she said, referring to another PFC who shared the same last name. "On my mark, you are going to put every round you have into the windows to the left of that gun position. Don't try to hit them, just make them keep their heads down. Volume of fire." "Understood." "Yes, ma'am." The ma'am was no longer sarcastic. It was a statement of faith. "I'm going to move to the kitchen. I'll have a flanking angle from the serving window in there," she stated, not as a plan for discussion, but as a fact that was about to occur. "Give me 30 seconds of continuous fire. Starting now." As one, the three Marines opened up, a torrent of lead that hammered the enemy position, forcing the insurgents to duck for cover. The heavy machine gun faltered. In that window of opportunity, Sharma moved. She didn't run. She flowed across the open floor of the mess hall, a gray blur against the wreckage, and disappeared into the darkness of the kitchen doorway. Cole kept firing, counting the seconds in his head. 28, 29, 30. He was about to yell "cease fire" when a new sound joined the battle. A single, distinct crack from the side, followed by a wet, metallic thwack. The deafening roar of the enemy machine gun stopped instantly, replaced by an eerie silence. Another crack. The spotter next to the gunner crumpled. Two more cracks in quick succession, and the supporting rifleman who had been pinned down by the Marines' fire also fell. Silence. Cole cautiously peered over their barricade. The machine gun nest was neutralized, for bodies lay still around the weapon. He looked toward the kitchen. Sharma emerged from the shadows, her rifle held at a low ready, smoke curling faintly from the barrel. She had taken a new position by the main door, her eyes already scanning for the next threat. She had single-handedly eliminated an entrenched heavy weapons team by flanking them through a kill zone and engaging multiple targets from an unsupported position. It was a maneuver that would be studied on a sand table at Quantico. She had done it as if she were walking to the grocery store. The shame Cole felt earlier was now replaced by something else, something purer. It was the awe a student feels for a master, the respect a soldier feels for a true leader. He had spent his entire career trying to emulate the ideal of a Marine NCO, the hard-charging, unbreakable warrior. In the space of an hour, this quiet, middle-aged woman had shown him that he didn't even understand the concept. He had been playing dress-up. This was the real thing. The dynamic in the besieged mess hall had undergone a seismic shift. There was no longer a Sergeant Cole and his squad of Marines. There was Task Force Sharma, a single, cohesive unit operating with a singular purpose, and its commander was the woman they had dismissed as a desk jockey. Cole was now her de facto executive officer. He didn't wait for her to ask for reports. He provided them. "Ma'am, ammo count is 2 mags per man, plus what's in the rifles. "Ma'am, Miller's bleeding has stopped, but he's going into shock." He relayed her orders, organized the distribution of water and ammunition, and coordinated the fields of fire, all while fighting his own position. The arrogance was gone, burned away by the fires of combat and replaced by a core of humble, focused duty. The other Marines mirrored the change. Their movements became sharper, more economical. They conserved ammunition, firing only when they had a clear target, just as she did. They communicated in low, clear tones. They moved with a newfound confidence, not in themselves, but in her. Her presence was a force multiplier, her calm a shield against the panic that gnawed at the edges of their minds. Suddenly, a new voice crackled over the radio on Cole's vest, which he'd thought was dead. It was staticky, broken. "New York Station, this is command. Is anyone?" Before Cole could fumble for the handset, Sharma was beside him. "Give it to me," she said. She took the radio, adjusted the squelch, and keyed the mic. Her voice was utterly transformed. It was the clipped, professional cadence of a high-level operator. "Unknown station, this is Sierra 4. I read you broken and unreadable. Authenticate." A pause, then the voice came back, slightly clearer. "Sierra 4, this is actual. Renner, my TOC is gone. My platoon commanders are not responding. What is your position and status?" It was Major Renner. He sounded lost, his voice thin and reedy with fear. "Actual, this is Sierra 4, Sharma replied, her voice a blade of ice. "We are fortified in the main dining facility. We have 7 effective personnel, multiple wounded. We are holding the western sector against significant enemy pressure. What is the status of the QRF?" There was a long silence on the other end. "QRF is... They're not coming, Sierra 4. The entire base is compromised. We're on our own," the major's voice cracked with despair. Sharma didn't miss a beat. "Roger that, actual. Then we will continue to hold this position. We have established a defensible perimeter. If you can consolidate other survivors, move to our location. We will provide cover." Cole stared at her. She had just taken de facto command of the entire sector from the company commander without even raising her voice. She had assessed the strategic situation, no help is coming, and immediately formulated a new tactical plan. Create a bastion of resistance and have other survivors rally to it. "Who is this?" Renner demanded, a hint of his old authority returning. "Identify yourself." Sharma paused for a fraction of a second. "This is CWO4 Sharma. We are busy here, Major. If you are moving to our position, do it now. We will be watching the southeast approach. Sierra 4, out." She tossed the radio back to Cole. The conversation was over. The look on Cole's face was one of pure astonishment. She had just dismissed a field-grade officer with the finality of a god. 10 minutes later, they saw movement from the direction of the ruined command post. A small, haggard group of men, stumbling through the smoke. Major Renner was among them, his uniform torn, a pistol clutched in his hand. "Hold your fire," Cole yelled to his men. "It's the Major." Sharma was already directing their cover. "Davis, suppress that rooftop. Give them a lane to move through. Cole, pop smoke if you have it." They laid down a curtain of fire, and the small group sprinted the last 50 yards, tumbling over the makeshift barricade into the relative safety of the mess hall. Major Renner collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. He was bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his arm. He looked around at the fortified position, at the disciplined, focused faces of the surviving Marines. Then he looked at Sharma, who was calmly observing the enemy's reaction to their maneuver. "Chief," Renner panted, trying to regain his composure. "Report." Sharma turned her head and looked down at him. Her gaze was not insubordinate, but it held the weight of absolute competence. There was no room for rank or ego in this room. There was only survival. "We are holding," she said simply. "We've sustained casualties, but the position is secure for now. I've tasked Sergeant Cole with managing the interior defense. We are low on ammunition and medical supplies." Renner, A man who lived and breathed by the rigid hierarchy of the officer corps, found himself at a complete loss. He was the commander. He was supposed to be in charge. But looking at this woman, at the utter certainty in her eyes and the way the other men orbited her, he knew he was out of his depth. He had studied war. She was war. He nodded, a gesture of concession. "What are your orders, Chief?" The question hung in the air, a complete inversion of the chain of command. The Marines, including Cole, looked from the Major to the CW04. It was a moment of truth. Sharma didn't gloat. She didn't even seem to notice the significance of the moment. She was already focused on the next tactical problem. "Major, you and your men will reinforce this wall," she said, pointing. "Sergeant Cole will brief you on the fields of fire. Consolidate your ammunition with ours. We hold until dawn. At dawn, the calculus of the battle changes. We use the light to break out." Her plan was simple, brutal, and clear. There was no talk of rescue. There was only the fight in front of them. Renner, humbled and defeated, simply said, "Understood." He got to his feet and turned to Cole. "Sergeant, brief me." The respect was now universal. It flowed from every person in the room toward the quiet woman who was now methodically clearing a jam in a salvaged M249 saw, her hands moving with a surgeon's grace. They had seen the truth. In the crucible of combat, titles and ranks were meaningless. All that mattered was competence, and CWO for Anya Sharma was competence made flesh. The mockery of the morning felt like it had happened in another lifetime to different people. They were all her men now. The long night bled into a bruised, gray dawn. The attacks had grown more sporadic, then finally ceased as the surviving insurgents, battered and broken by the unexpectedly fierce resistance from the mess hall, melted back into the landscape. The sounds of battle across the FOB died down, replaced by the crackle of fires and the distant, welcome whine of inbound medevac helicopters. They had held. The inside of the mess hall looked like a scene from a nightmare. The air was thick with the smell of blood, cordite, and dust. Bodies lay under makeshift shrouds. The living were slumped against the barricades, their faces gaunt and smeared with grime, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. But they were alive. Anya Sharma sat by herself, near the kitchen entrance where she had made her stand against the machine gun nest. The borrowed M4 rifle was laid across her lap on a clean piece of cloth she had found. With meticulous, practiced movements, she was field-stripping the weapon, pushpin by pushpin, spring by spring. Her hands, steady and sure, moved with a familiar reverence. It was a ritual, a way of bringing order back to a world that had descended into chaos. She wasn't cleaning a tool. She was honoring a partner. She ignored the activity around her. The arrival of the quick reaction force, the shouts of medics, the flurry of officers trying to piece together what had happened. None of it touched her. She was in her own space, a small bubble of quiet purpose. She had a small, self-inflicted wound on her left bicep, a deep gash she'd gotten from a piece of flying metal while dragging Miller to safety. She had stitched it closed herself hours ago with a needle and thread from a sewing kit in her pocket, the work neat and brutally functional. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Sergeant Cole watched her from across the room. He had given his report to a bewildered-looking captain from the QRF, a short, factual account that placed Sharma at the center of their survival. He had left out the trident, the call sign, the legend. That was not his story to tell. But his words had painted a clear enough picture. He had described her tactics, her marksmanship, her leadership. He simply stated the facts, and the facts were unbelievable. He saw Major Renner approach her. The Major's arm was in a sling, his face pale. He stood before her for a long moment, watching her hands work on the rifle parts. "Chief Sharma," Renner said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its former bluster. The command wants a full after-action report. They're calling what you did here pivotal. You saved this entire sector." Sharma didn't look up. She dipped a corner of the cloth into a small bottle of CLP and began cleaning the bolt carrier group. "We held the line, Major. The Marines fought well." "They fought well because you led them," Renner insisted. I've never seen anything like it. I'm recommending you for a Navy Cross. Anya finished wiping down the bolt and began to reassemble it, the parts clicking together with satisfying precision. Just write in your report that everyone did their duty, sir. That's all that's required. Her tone was final. It left no room for argument. She was not interested in medals or glory. The work was its own reward. The survival of the men around her was the only commendation she needed. Renner stood there for another moment, then nodded slowly and walked away, a man profoundly changed. Cole knew words were useless. An apology for his behavior that morning would be an insult. It would be an attempt to clear his own conscience, not to honor her. Actions were the only language that mattered in her world. He had understood that now. He walked over to his pack, rummaged inside, and pulled out his K-bar fighting knife. It wasn't standard issue. It was his own, the handle wrapped in worn paracord, the blade honed to a razor's edge. It had been with him on 3 deployments. It was his personal totem, a symbol of his identity as a Marine infantryman. He approached her slowly, quietly. She continued her work, acknowledging his presence with only the slightest flicker of her eyes. He knelt beside her, not in supplication, but in a gesture of respect between warriors. He didn't speak. He simply laid the K-bar on the clean cloth next to the reassembled rifle. The knife, a tool of close, desperate combat, sat next to the rifle, a tool of distant, precise lethality. It was an offering, a transfer of fealty. It was his way of saying, "You are the warrior. I am the student. My strength is yours to command." Anya Sharma paused her work. She looked at the knife. Her gaze traveled from the honed blade to the worn handle. Then she looked up and met Cole's eyes. For the first time, the flat, gray neutrality was gone. In its place was a flicker of understanding, a deep, quiet acknowledgement that passed between them without a word. It was a look that said she understood the gesture, understood its weight, and accepted it. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned back to her work, picking up the lower receiver to join it with the upper. The ritual continued. Cole remained kneeling for a moment longer before rising. He didn't retrieve his knife. He stepped back, retrieved his own rifle, and took up a watch position a few feet away from her, his back to her, facing the chaotic activity of the rest of the FOB. He stood guard, a silent sentinel protecting the quiet woman who was cleaning her weapon. He was no longer the arrogant alpha. He was a shield for the woman who had saved them all, a quiet guardian for the ghost who walked among them. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the broken compound. And in the quiet corner of the ruined mess hall, a new order had been established, paid for in blood and sealed with a silent mutual respect.